Hello one, hello all. It's the gothiest ghost of them all, Casper in the flesh, and it's time for a review of Nails Every Bridge Burning. So, hate to interrupt you, but, remember that girl I told you about? Yeah. What about her? Am I finally going to meet her? Well, she's right here. So you've disappeared for a long time, and the girl who you've been seeing is my girl? Sean, I swear to God, I will end you! Anyway, Nails has proven to be one of the most savage bands out right now, one of the most visceral, brutal, ass-kicking bands ever, with release after release. From their 2010 debut album, Unsilent Death, which has been out for over a decade now and still kicks ass, still skull-crushing, still an invigorating LP. Their sophomore album, in my opinion, has certainly aged well too. And I feel they did try out new stuff on there, hitting us with a higher screamed vocal register. And I can't deny how much of a chaotic fever dream that thing was, and after listen, it has definitely stuck with me from the first time I've listened to it. And then You Will Never Be One of Us, which at the time I deemed to be their second best record, as they dove into other elements such as black metal, and delivered some longer tracks as well. Now, I've never formally reviewed Nails. This is my first time reviewing a Nails record, but certainly not my first time reviewing a grindcore record. If you remember back, I reviewed the Wormrot record a couple years back, which was excellent, and unfortunately, don't quote me on this, but I think it's their last one. And honestly, with each listen, I've grown more excitement for this record, more love for this record. But if you're expecting a longer album from them that passes the 30-minute mark, I'm sorry, you're going to be disappointed in that department. But I promise you, the vocals are sounding more savage. They're sounding more bestial and gargled. If I'm to make a comparison here, picture Corey Taylor from Slipknot being bit by a rabid werewolf, and then running into a vat of biochemicals, turning into this mutated version of a werewolf on this album. Like, in my opinion, if no one ever heard, like, visceral music before, visceral heavy music, Nails would not be the first band I would put them onto, at least not for their back catalog anyway. But this time around though, I think this album alone would be a great starter. Now, I'm not saying this is easy listening or anything, I'm not saying that at all. But I would say it's their most catchy and most accessible album yet, with probably dishing out some of the most fiery guitar melodies I've probably ever heard them lay on a track or album. So I would say this album is definitely a step up in the context of being more adventurous. I love the way some of these tracks flow into the other. And while I did say accessible, this thing is still certainly visceral. It's still intense, but it's definitely memorable. And their lyrics are certainly more isolated in concept, more heartless, more callous. While this album is accessible, yes, probably the most accessible, it's still visceral, it's still very intense, but it's still memorable. And the lyrics are certainly more isolated in concept, certainly more callous and heartless. And in terms of the sound, which is an absolute onslaught to the eardrums, we're getting a lot of ferocity, a lot of confrontation in the span of 17 minutes. And it certainly packs one hell of a punch, a drop kick, a power bomb, any form of attack you could possibly think of. And a chair shot for good measure, and I truly love that. And I used to love wrestling back in the day. And you can even tell with the cover alone, it's indicative of what to expect here. Like, before even listening to this album, you're seeing a demon dude on the cover with fire coming out of his mouth. You're seeing a demon dude on the cover with fire bursting out of his mouth, just spraying in all directions. Which seems to be an ocean near this monster, and it makes sense because it correlates to the album title. And also lyrically, and also sonically, this album is just destructive on all cylinders. I feel conceptually Todd is annihilating everything in his path and not looking back. He is reciprocal of pain and delivering it right back. And he's dishing it right back on 11. I mean, the title really does say it all. I also want to say I love the old school metal guitar lines here. I feel we're even getting some speed metal here. But I also love the rhyming lyrics too. And when it comes to rhyming, that's not an everyday thing for metal. I mean, sure, you can get that from other bands such as Autopsy, Undeath, but it's pretty uncommon to actually experience that within a death metal, metalcore album or a metal album in general. And I love how they keep things eat a bowl full of glass, spit it back at your enemies aggressive on here. It just has so much attitude, but not cringe. And I also feel like there are tracks on here that are longer. Maybe not as long as the closer of the 8-minute mark on You'll Never Be One of Us, no, but definitely pushing over 2 minutes. The longest track in comparison to here would be the title track. The longest track in comparison to that track would be over 3 minutes. And not as long as the previous finale, but still a banger. I also want to state how each track does some creative inclusions, and also the tracks too do not overstay their welcome. They can still keep things engaging. And while every track is insanely aggressive and visceral, they still create a dichotomy amongst the other tracks. The production is monstrous. The guitars, while heavy and crushing this time around, they are still taking some risks as well. But yes, you are still getting the compression, you're still getting the distortion. And I love how the feedback is used as a sequential tool to keep the flow of this album, and how it segues from one track into another, or to keep the flow of the track going in general, or how sometimes the following riff will transition perfectly into the next track. The drums are powerful, the blast beats and drum layering is insane, the vocals sound very inhumane, almost bestial in a way, and some of the guitar melodies here are absolutely fantastic. But still, they don't take away from the harsh ferocity that Nails normally offers, such as Give Me the Painkiller, or I Can't Turn It Off. Like the tension, the rage, it's consistent. The closing track, as I mentioned before, definitely serves as something more sludgy, more doomy, like the intro to the closer, with these heavy, chunky, distorted guitars. I love how the feedback keeps the flow of the track, the ominous soloing leads, the gargantuan riffs that lyrically paints a picture of solitude, distrust for anyone, just wanting to live your life, and just feeling self-isolation. The song Punishment Map features these rapid-fire blast beats with this chanted, almost demonic-like chorus that's catchy as hell with these heavy, groovy guitars. And I love the panel chanting on the title track that is catchy as hell but simultaneously claustrophobic. The crunchiness of the guitars, the revingness of the guitars, it just kicks absolute ass. The song Give Me the Painkiller has these distorted, hellish guitar arpeggios with a blistering distorted guitar passage at the end. And I love the isolation between the thunderous drums and bass. There's also the catchiest song on here, lacking the ability to process empathy. Lacking the ability to process empathy. Going back to what I was saying earlier, Nails could be so vicious, so savage, but still catchy as hell. But still keep it aggressive, not to mention the pummeling guitar riffs in between this track. And Made Up in Your Mind, which is probably the second catchiest track here, that has these ungodly throat-shredding vocals and ominous guitar breaks. And the ending of this thing, I would say, is very solid. I love the galloping guitar riffs, and again, the solo, the space for the instrumentation. So it gives you a little bit of room to breathe. With the drum solo and then the revving, buzzing guitars, they just create this intensity that ends things off really well with these wailing guitars. And probably the most fiery one I've probably ever heard them do. And the longest track here, which is definitely expected for a Nails record, and the closer, which is the longest track here, which is expected from a Nails record, as I mentioned before, puts the heavy nail in the coffin. The chords are very heavy, they're descending. I love the pounding grooves. I love the distorted arpeggios in between. While not as multifaceted, I do love the dark, dungeon-like vibe that this track has, and the overall sentiment. And no fade out this time, Thank God this thing ends naturally. And as far as the tracks I wasn't really into, it was just a more matter of them not picking things up, not being as interesting as the highlights here, maybe not as long as I'd like them to be. So yeah, overall, Nails is pretty much proven to be still one of the most visceral, ass-kicking bands of all time. They have certainly not let up with the ferocity, but also still carrying a way to keep them creative, keep them engaging. And not only that, but again, with how intricately they've learned how to flow one track to the next, they're certainly a band that has proven through time they are just developing and developing, even if I thought their previous material was great. And also, I would say, again, they have certainly filled in the gaps that I felt was missing on their last album, which I also thought was great. So, yeah, excellent songwriting, excellent visceral playing, and yeah, feeling a 4.5 out of 5 on this album. If you've given this a listen, what did you think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? And yeah, I'm Caspa. I'm your plug. Hit me with a sub. Show me love. And that's it. Caspa, Gothic Ghost, Nails. Till we meet again.